Everything money could buy.
Except the truth about the daughter he never knew existed. Father! Where did you get that?
Months later, every major news network in South Korea replayed the same impossible footage. Park Min-jae, the famously cold CEO of Haneul Holdings, stood frozen in the middle of a charity gala as a little black girl ran through a crowd of billionaires and wrapped her tiny arms around his leg. Hundreds of cameras flashed while the room fell into stunned silence. The child looked up at him with frightened eyes shimmering beneath the crystal chandeliers and whispered words no one expected. "Please don't let him find us." Min-jae stared at her, unable to understand why his chest suddenly felt too tight to breathe. Before he could ask who she was talking about, a woman pushed through the crowd, her face pale with terror. Their eyes met for the first time. The champagne glass slipped from Min-jae's hand and shattered across the marble floor. The woman stopped moving. So did he. Somewhere inside the ballroom, a man quietly turned around and walked away before anyone noticed him. By the time security reached the entrance, he had disappeared. Every instinct Min-jae had spent years sharpening told him only one thing. Whoever that man was, he had been watching the woman and the little girl long before tonight. 3 weeks earlier, rain drummed steadily against the glass walls of Seojin Heights, one of Busan's newest luxury apartment towers overlooking the harbor. Park Min-jae barely noticed it. At 36, he had become the youngest CEO in Haneul Holdings history by refusing to let anything distract him from work. His calendar was planned months ahead. His meals arrived at the same hour every day. His meetings never started late. His employees admired him. His competitors feared him. His loneliness had become so familiar that he no longer recognized it as loneliness. It simply felt like discipline. The black sedan rolled into the underground garage before stopping beside the private elevator reserved for the building's penthouse residents. His assistant, Kang Dae-hyun, stepped out first. "Everything has been moved upstairs, sir." Min-jae nodded, without looking away from the financial report displayed on his tablet. Tomorrow's schedule? Board meeting at 8. Tokyo investors at 11. Dinner with Chairman Han at 7. Cancel dinner. Dae-hyun blinked. "Sir, I don't need another dinner where people pretend to enjoy my company because they want something." "Understood." The elevator doors opened directly into apartment 2401. It was exactly how Min-jae liked things. White walls, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sea, expensive furniture that looked untouched, no family photographs, no decorations, nothing capable of creating emotional attachment. He unpacked one suitcase, hung 3 tailored suits inside the closet, placed a single coffee mug beside the espresso machine, and opened his laptop. The silence suited him, until it didn't. A dull thump echoed through the shared wall. His fingers paused above the keyboard. Another thump followed. Then came the faint sound of furniture scraping across the floor. His new neighbor had moved in. He sighed once, reached for his noise-canceling headphones, and continued reviewing acquisition documents. 5 minutes later, another sound drifted through the wall. Children's laughter, soft, bright, completely out of place inside a building that mostly housed executives and retired diplomats. Min-jae increased the volume of his headphones. Problem solved, or so he believed. Next door, Naomi Carter struggled to unlock apartment 2402 while balancing 2 grocery bags and an umbrella dripping rainwater across the hallway floor. One paper bag suddenly split open. Apples rolled in every direction. Oh no! Before she could bend down, 6-year-old Amara darted after them, laughing as she chased each runaway apple with determined little steps. "I got them, Mommy." Naomi couldn't help smiling. "Slow down. I'm being careful." "You always say that." "Because I always am." Naomi shook her head, kissed the top of her daughter's curls, and gathered the remaining groceries. 3 years earlier, she had left Atlanta with a teaching contract, a broken engagement, and a promise to herself that she would never again build her happiness around someone else's choices. South Korea had been meant to be temporary. Instead, it had slowly become the first place that felt safe. Their apartment was modest compared to the penthouse next door, but every corner carried warmth. Half-unpacked boxes lined the walls. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. Books sat stacked beside the sofa, waiting for shelves that hadn't yet been assembled. It wasn't luxurious. It was alive. Amara wandered toward the shared wall. "Mommy? Yes? Do you think our neighbor likes kids?" Naomi laughed quietly. "We haven't even met him. Maybe we should bake cookies. Maybe after we're settled. What if he's lonely?" Naomi paused for a moment. Children notice things adults often ignored. "Then I hope someone is kind to him." Neither of them saw the man standing across the street beneath a black umbrella. He wasn't watching the building. He was watching one specific window, apartment 2402. He lifted his phone, zoomed in, and took a photograph before slipping the device back into his pocket. "Found you," he whispered. Then he disappeared into the rain before anyone noticed he had been there. Upstairs, Min-jae finished another conference call and removed his headphones. The apartment was silent again. He stood to make coffee when a tiny voice drifted through the wall. "Mama." He froze. "Do you think he'll ever find us?" The words were barely louder than a whisper. They weren't meant for him. But for reasons he couldn't explain, they stayed with him long after the apartment had gone quiet. For the first time since moving into Seojin Heights, Park Min-jae found himself staring at the wall, separating his life from the strangers next door, wondering who they were and who they were hiding from. Min-jae slept less than 3 hours that night. It wasn't the board meeting waiting for him in the morning that kept him awake. It wasn't the billion-dollar merger scheduled for approval before noon. It was a single question, spoken by a child through a concrete wall. "Do you think he'll ever find us?" The words refused to leave him. At 6 sharp, he left his apartment dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, expecting another ordinary day. As the elevator doors opened, he nearly collided with someone kneeling on the hallway floor. Colored pencils rolled in every direction. A small backpack lay open beside a little girl, frantically gathering her things. "I'm sorry," she blurted before even looking up. "I made a mess." Min-jae instinctively stepped around the pencils. He had no intention of stopping. Children usually cried, screamed, or asked questions he didn't have time to answer. But one red pencil rolled directly against his polished shoe. He stared at it for a second before bending down and picking it up. The little girl finally looked at him. Her eyes were large, curious, and startlingly familiar to the frightened voice he had heard the night before. "Thank you, mister." He handed her the pencil without speaking. Behind her, the apartment door opened. "Amara?" Naomi stepped into the hallway carrying a stack of books before noticing the stranger standing beside her daughter. "Oh, I'm so sorry. We were just leaving." Min-jae gave a brief nod. "Good morning." Naomi smiled politely. "You must be our neighbor." "Apartment 2401. We're in 2402. I'm Naomi, and this is my daughter, Amara." Amara grinned. "Mom says we should bake you cookies." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment in embarrassment. "Amara? What? You did say that." For the first time in months, something almost resembling amusement crossed Min-jae's face. Almost. "Have a good day." The elevator doors opened again, and he stepped inside. Naomi watched them close before sighing. "Well, he seems serious." "He's lonely," Amara answered confidently. "How do you know?" "His eyes." Naomi looked toward the closed elevator doors, without realizing those same words would stay with her all day. Across the street, inside a parked gray sedan, the man with the black umbrella lowered a pair of binoculars. He had just watched the entire interaction through the windshield. "So," he murmured, "you've already met your neighbor." He made another note inside a small leather notebook. CEO. Apartment 2401. First contact established. Then he started the engine and drove away. By noon, Min-jae had forgotten about the hallway encounter. His boardroom demanded absolute focus. Numbers filled the massive screen, while directors debated acquisition risks. Investors argued over percentages. Lawyers reviewed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Then his phone vibrated. Dae-hyun frowned after reading the notification. "Sir, what is it?" "Building management called." "Why?" "Apparently a little girl in your hallway accidentally delivered a drawing to your apartment instead of hers." Min Jae barely looked up. "Return it. The manager already left it on your dining table." "Fine." The meeting continued for another 4 hours. By the time Min Jae returned home, the sun had begun sinking behind the harbor. The drawing lay exactly where the manager had said it would. Crayons, construction paper, bright colors. Normally, he would have thrown it away without looking. Instead, something made him unfold it. A little stick figure stood beside a much taller one, beneath a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Every hero lives next door." Min Jae frowned. It had clearly been meant for someone else. Before he could set it down, another sheet slipped from behind it. This one wasn't colorful. It showed a little girl hiding behind her mother, while a man with no face stood outside a door. Above the drawing, written in much smaller letters, was a question. "What if he finds us again?" A knock echoed through the apartment. 3 slow knocks. Min Jae opened the door to find Naomi standing there, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry to bother you. Amara thinks she left one of her drawings." He silently handed both pages to her. The smile disappeared from Naomi's face the instant she saw the second drawing. Her fingers tightened around the paper. "Thank you," she said quietly. She turned to leave before Min Jae spoke for the first time since meeting her. "Is someone looking for you?" Naomi stopped walking. The hallway suddenly felt much colder. After several long seconds, she forced a small smile that never reached her eyes. Just an overactive imagination. She disappeared inside apartment 2402 before he could ask another question. Behind her closed door, Naomi leaned against the wall and struggled to steady her breathing. She hadn't realized Amara had drawn that picture, which meant her daughter remembered far more than Naomi had hoped. Outside the building, parked beneath a broken streetlight, the gray sedan returned. The man inside watched apartment 2402 through the darkness. This time, he smiled. "Soon," he whispered. "Very soon." Upstairs, completely unaware he was being watched too, Park Min-jae looked once more at the wall separating his apartment from Naomi's. Then, for the first time in years, he locked his front door, twice. The next morning began with silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that settled over a building before something changed forever. Naomi barely slept. Every few minutes, she found herself looking through the peephole, convinced someone was standing outside her apartment. Each time the hallway was empty. By 7, Amara was already dressed for school, humming softly as she packed her crayons into her backpack. "Mommy?" Naomi forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart? Are we moving again?" The question hit harder than Naomi expected. "Why would you ask that?" Amara shrugged. "Because every time you start checking the door a lot, we move." Naomi knelt until they were eye level. "We're not going anywhere. Promise?" She hesitated for only a second before nodding. "I promise." She hated making promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Meanwhile, one floor above, Park Min-jae stood inside his dressing room, fastening his watch, while reading overnight reports on his tablet. His assistant called precisely at 7:30. "Good morning, sir. Report. Tokyo approved the acquisition. The legal team wants your signature by noon. Anything else?" There was a brief pause. "Building security contacted me." Min-jae looked up. "Why?" "Someone requested the resident list for this floor." His expression hardened. "Who?" "They refused to identify themselves." "Did security release it?" "No." "Good." The call ended, but the conversation lingered in his mind longer than it should have. As he stepped into the hallway, he found Naomi struggling to carry several boxes, while Amara held the elevator door open with both hands. One of the boxes slipped. Books scattered across the polished floor. Min-jae instinctively bent down before realizing what he was doing. Naomi looked surprised. "You don't have to." He handed her the books one by one without answering. Amara smiled. "See, Mommy? I told you he was nice. Naomi laughed awkwardly. Thank you. Min-jae noticed one of the books before placing it back inside the box. It was a children's storybook. Tucked inside its pages was an old newspaper clipping. The photograph showed Naomi standing outside an American courthouse, surrounded by reporters. Before he could read the headline, she gently took the book from his hands. Old memories, she said softly. Some are better left closed. The elevator arrived. They stepped inside together. The ride lasted less than a minute, but no one spoke. As the doors opened into the lobby, Amara suddenly grabbed Min-jae's hand. Naomi's eyes widened. Amara, just until we cross the floor, the little girl said innocently. The tiles are slippery. Min-jae looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around two of his fingers. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without feeling nervous. Yet somehow, he had no idea what to do now. They crossed the lobby in silence before Amara finally let go. Thank you, Mr. Neighbor. Naomi smiled apologetically. She's very trusting. That's rare, Min-jae replied. Don't let the world take it from her. Naomi stared at him, surprised by the unexpected warmth in his voice. Before she could respond, a delivery truck pulled up outside the entrance. The driver unloaded several large flower arrangements addressed to Hanul Holdings. As cameras gathered around the CEO, Naomi quietly led Amara toward the school bus stop. Neither of them noticed the man sitting inside a nearby cafe, watching everything through the reflection in the window. He took another photograph. This time, it captured Min-jae, walking only a few steps behind Naomi and Amara. He sent the image to an unknown number. Seconds later, his phone vibrated. Keep watching. Do not approach yet. He smiled. Understood. That afternoon, Naomi returned home earlier than usual after her final class was canceled. Something immediately felt wrong. Her apartment door was closed exactly as she had left it, but the welcome mat sat slightly crooked. She always kept it perfectly straight. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she unlocked the door. Nothing looked disturbed. The furniture remained in place. The dishes were untouched. Even Amara's toys sat exactly where they belonged. She searched every room anyway. Empty. She finally relaxed until she reached the kitchen table. Resting in the center was a single white envelope. No stamp, no address, no name. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was only one sentence, typed in black ink. You were easier to find than you thought. The paper slipped from her fingers. At that exact moment, someone knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. Naomi froze. Another 3 knocks followed. Her breathing became shallow. She couldn't move. Then a familiar voice came through the door. It's Park Min-jae. She stared at the envelope on the floor before finally opening the door a few inches. I'm sorry, he said. Your daughter left this in the elevator. He held out Amara's stuffed rabbit. One look at Naomi's face told him something was terribly wrong. What happened? She tried to answer, but no words came out. Min-jae followed her eyes to the envelope lying on the floor. Without asking permission, he picked it up and read the single sentence inside. His expression changed instantly. The calm businessman disappeared. In his place stood a man whose instincts were suddenly screaming that the frightened words he'd heard through the wall had never been a child's imagination. Someone had found them. Naomi's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She reached for the envelope, but Min-jae had already read the single sentence inside. You were easier to find than you thought. The words hung between them like a storm cloud. Who sent this? He asked quietly. Naomi looked away. I don't know. That's not true. Silence answered him. He folded the paper once, before placing it back inside the envelope. This wasn't random. Naomi swallowed hard. No. Has this happened before? She closed her eyes for a moment. Yes. Before he could ask another question, the front door burst open. Mommy! Amara rushed inside, after returning from school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She stopped when she saw Min-jae standing in the living room. Mr. Neighbor. She smiled and ran toward him before Naomi gently caught her hand. Wash your hands first, sweetheart. Okay. The little girl disappeared down the hallway, humming to herself. Only after the bathroom door closed did Naomi finally speak. She can't know. Know what? That we're being watched. Min Jae studied her face. She wasn't simply frightened. She was exhausted from being frightened for a very long time. Sit down, he said. Tell me everything. Naomi hesitated. Trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet something about the man standing in front of her made lying feel pointless. 3 years ago, I worked for an education foundation in Atlanta. One of our biggest donors was a businessman named Richard Hale. Min Jae remained silent. Everyone thought he was generous, charitable, respected. She laughed bitterly. Until I discovered he was using the foundation to move money through fake scholarship programs. Did you report him? She nodded. The investigation began 2 weeks later. What happened? He disappeared before they arrested him. Min Jae frowned. And you believe he's looking for you? Not because I believe it. She looked directly into his eyes. Because he told me he would. A chill settled over the room. He said if I ever testified against him, her voice broke, he'd make sure I spent the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Did you testify? Yes. Was he convicted? She slowly shook her head. They never found him. Min Jae glanced at the envelope again. Until now. Naomi nodded once. I've spent 3 years moving from city to city. Different apartments. Different schools. Different jobs. Why South Korea? Because I thought he'd never look here. Before Min Jae could respond, Amara returned carrying 3 cups of tea, balanced carefully on a tray. Mommy says tea makes scary days better. She placed 1 cup in front of Min Jae. You can have one too. He looked at the steaming cup before accepting it. Thank you. You're welcome, she smiled proudly, before climbing onto the sofa with a coloring book. Min Jae watched her for a moment. She colored quietly, completely unaware that her world had begun shifting again. His phone vibrated. It was Dae-hyun. Sir, where are you? At home. You need to see something. Talk. Building security reviewed this morning's surveillance footage. Min Jae's expression changed. And? Someone entered the building using a cloned resident access card. Naomi looked up immediately. Did they identify him? Not exactly, Dae-hyun answered. He wore a cap and kept his head down. Then what did you find? He never visited your apartment. A long pause followed. He stopped outside apartment 2402 for exactly 4 minutes. Naomi's face turned white. I'm sending the footage now. Seconds later, Min Jae opened the video on his phone. The camera showed the hallway outside their apartments. A tall man wearing dark clothing approached Naomi's door. He didn't knock. He simply stood there, looking at it. Then he crouched, slid something beneath the welcome mat, and walked away without ever looking at the camera. Freeze it, Min Jae said. He enlarged the image. The man's face remained hidden beneath the brim of his cap. But one detail stood out immediately. A silver ring engraved with the head of a wolf. Naomi gasped. The color drained from her face. You know that ring. She nodded slowly. Richard wore one exactly like it. The room fell silent. Min Jae looked back at the paused image. Then he's here. Naomi whispered the words she had feared saying aloud for years. No. She looked toward the hallway where Amara was quietly singing to herself while coloring another picture. He's closer than that. At that exact moment, someone knocked on apartment 2402's door. 3 slow knocks. Every muscle in Naomi's body stiffened. Min Jae stood without hesitation. Stay with Amara. Another 3 knocks echoed through the apartment. Min Jae walked toward the door, his expression calm but alert. He looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. He frowned and slowly opened the door. Nothing. No one stood outside. Then he looked down. Resting on the welcome mat was a small gift box wrapped with a bright red ribbon. A white card sat neatly on top. Only 4 words were written across the front. For Amara, welcome home. Min Jae's eyes remained fixed on the small gift box. Every instinct told him not to touch it. Behind him, Naomi had already gone pale. Don't open it, she whispered. He didn't. Instead, he carefully picked up the box by its ribbon and carried it into the hallway. placing it several feet away from both apartments. "Call security," he said. Naomi reached for her phone with trembling hands. Before she could dial, Amara's cheerful voice floated from the living room. "Who was at the door?" "No one, sweetheart," Naomi answered quickly. "Just stay inside." A few minutes later, 2 security officers arrived, followed by the building manager. The box was examined carefully before being opened. There was no explosive, no weapon, no dangerous substance. Inside rested a beautifully dressed porcelain ballerina and a folded piece of white paper. One of the officers unfolded the note. His expression changed immediately. "Sir." He handed it to Min Jae. The message was typed in the same black letters as the first one. "She still sleeps with the light on. Some children never outgrow their fears." Naomi's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the hallway wall to steady herself. There was only one way someone could know that. Every night, Amara insisted on leaving the small lamp beside her bed switched on. No one outside their apartment should have known, unless someone had been watching through the windows, or inside the apartment itself. Min Jae looked at the security manager. "Seal this floor." "Immediately, sir." "Review every camera from the past month." "Yes, sir." "And no one enters or leaves without my authorization." The manager nodded before hurrying toward the elevators. As everyone dispersed, Min Jae turned back toward Naomi. "We're checking your apartment." "For what?" "Anything." They searched every room together. Kitchen cabinets, closets, air vents, smoke detectors. Nothing looked unusual until Min Jae reached the living room bookshelf. One decorative photo frame sat slightly crooked. He lifted it. A tiny black object, no larger than a coin, had been attached to the back with adhesive. Naomi stared at it. "What is that?" Min Jae's expression hardened. "A camera." He carefully removed it without touching the lens. "How long has that been there?" Naomi shook her head. "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "Oh God." Suddenly, every private moment inside the apartment felt exposed. Every bedtime story, every conversation, every tear, every laugh. Someone had been watching them inside what Naomi believed was the only safe place she had left. Min Jae continued searching. 5 minutes later, he found a second device, hidden beneath the dining table. A microphone. Naomi covered her mouth as tears finally escaped. "He knows everything," she whispered. Every conversation, every plan. Min Jae immediately carried both devices onto his own balcony before placing them inside a metal storage box. "If he's listening," he said quietly, "then let's make him hear exactly what we want." Naomi looked at him in confusion. "You're going to lie to him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's time he stopped controlling the next move." That evening, Min Jae invited Naomi and Amara into his apartment for dinner. At first, Naomi refused, insisting she didn't want to become his responsibility. He simply answered, "You're not." Amara solved the argument herself. "Can we eat with Mr. Neighbor just this once?" Naomi finally nodded. It was the first time laughter had entered either apartment in days. Amara proudly helped set the table, while Min Jae attempted to cook under her enthusiastic supervision. "You're cutting the carrots too big," she announced. "I don't usually cook." "That's okay," she smiled. "I'll teach you." Naomi watched quietly from across the kitchen. For the first time since moving into Seijin Heights, she saw something different in the man everyone described as cold. Around Amara, he wasn't awkward anymore. He was careful, gentle, almost protective. She wondered if he realized it himself. Across the city, inside a luxury hotel suite overlooking the harbor, another man watched live video from a laptop. The screen suddenly went black. Then another feed disappeared. Then another. His smile faded. "Interesting," he murmured. A second man entered the room. "We lost both cameras." Richard Hale slowly closed the laptop. "He's smarter than I expected." "The CEO?" Richard nodded once. "Park Min Jae." He walked toward the window and looked out over the glittering lights of Busan. Powerful men usually ignore problems that don't belong to them. He smiled faintly. This one didn't. His assistant frowned. "Should we move now?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "No. Why not?" Because now, he reached into his pocket and turned a silver wolf ring around his finger. I'm curious. Back at Seijin Heights, dinner had just ended. Amara had fallen asleep on the sofa while watching an animated movie. Naomi covered her daughter with a blanket. Thank you, she whispered to Min-jae, for everything today. He looked toward the sleeping child. She shouldn't have to live like this. Naomi's eyes filled again. Neither should you. Before either of them could say another word, Min-jae's phone rang. It was Dae-hyun. His voice sounded urgent. Sir, what happened? We identified the owner of the cloned access card. Who is it? One of the building's maintenance technicians. Where is he? Silence. Then Dae-hyun answered quietly. He's dead. Min-jae's expression darkened. When? About an hour ago. Another pause. Sir, there's something else. Go on. Written on the wall beside the body, Dae-hyun swallowed, was your name. Naomi immediately knew something was wrong the moment she saw the color drain from Min-jae's face. He lowered the phone slowly, his jaw tightening as if he were forcing himself to remain calm. What happened? She asked. He looked at Amara sleeping peacefully on the sofa before answering. Stay here tonight. Min-jae, please. It was the first time he had spoken her name without formality. She noticed. So did he. Tell me. He glanced toward the child again. Not here. 10 minutes later, after one of his trusted security officers arrived to remain inside the apartment with Amara, Min-jae and Naomi drove across the city in silence. The black sedan stopped outside a police cordon behind one of Hanail Holdings' maintenance warehouses. Flashing blue lights reflected across the wet pavement. Detectives moved between yellow barricades, while forensic investigators photographed every inch of the alley. Detective Han Ji-soo approached the moment Min-jae stepped from the car. Mr. Park, report. She hesitated after noticing Naomi. The victim is Lee Dong-hyun, 38, maintenance contractor for Seojin Heights. Naomi's heartbeat quickened. What happened to him? Han looked toward the alley. Someone wanted him silenced. They walked beneath the police tape until the detective stopped several feet from the covered body. Min-jae noticed the wall immediately. 4 words had been sprayed across the concrete in thick black paint. You should have walked away. Beneath the message, written much smaller, was his full name. Park Min-jae. Naomi instinctively moved closer to him. Han continued. Mr. Lee was the technician responsible for installing smart security systems in your building. Min-jae's eyes narrowed. He had access to every apartment. Yes, including 2402. Han nodded. We're checking whether someone forced him to install surveillance devices. Naomi whispered. Or paid him. Before anyone could answer, a young forensic officer hurried toward the detective, carrying a sealed evidence bag. We found this inside the victim's jacket. Han opened the bag carefully. Inside was a folded maintenance request. Apartment 2402. Date: 4 days before Naomi moved into the building. Reported issue: smoke detector replacement. Naomi's breathing stopped. There was never a maintenance visit. Han looked at her. Are you certain? Positive. I wasn't even in South Korea yet. The detective slowly folded the document again. Then someone created a fake work order. Min-jae immediately understood why. It gave Lee Dong-hyun legitimate access to apartment 2402 before Naomi ever received the keys. Enough time to hide cameras. Enough time to install microphones. Enough time to prepare the apartment before she arrived. He wasn't being watched after he moved in, Min-jae said quietly. He was waiting. Han looked at him. Waiting for what? For Naomi. Silence settled over the alley. No one wanted to say the obvious conclusion aloud. This hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been luck. Whoever was behind this had known exactly where Naomi would live before she did. Back at Seojin Heights, Amara woke to an unfamiliar apartment and an unfamiliar ceiling. She rubbed her eyes before quietly climbing off the sofa. Mommy? No answer. She padded toward the kitchen, where one of Min-jae's security officers smiled gently. Your mom will be back soon. Amara nodded, but didn't seem convinced. She wandered toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Something outside caught her attention. Across the street, beneath a flickering street lamp, stood a man holding a black umbrella. He wasn't moving. He was simply looking up at the building, looking directly at her window. Amara frowned. The man slowly raised one gloved hand. Then he waved. A soft knock sounded behind her before she could react. She turned to see the security officer approaching with a warm smile. "Hot chocolate?" he asked. "Yes, please." By the time she looked back toward the window, the man had vanished. An hour later, Min-jae returned home with Naomi. The detective had insisted on placing officers around the building until morning. As they stepped into the private elevator, neither of them spoke. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. "This is my fault. No. If I hadn't moved here, he would have found another way. You don't know that. I know men like him." She turned toward him. "How?" The elevator continued rising. Min-jae stared at the floor indicator before answering. "Because my father was one." Naomi looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Powerful." His voice became quieter. "Respected in public, feared in private." The elevator doors opened, but neither of them stepped out immediately. "When I was 12, Min-jae continued, I watched people ignore what he did because they depended on him. Naomi remained silent. "Money has a way of making people look away. Is that why you built your company the way you did?" He nodded once. "No favors, no corruption, no debts." For the first time, Naomi understood the loneliness behind his discipline. It wasn't arrogance, it was armor. They walked into the hallway together. The police officer stationed outside apartment 2402 approached immediately. "Mr. Park, anything unusual?" "No, sir." Before anyone could relax, the elevator behind them chimed again. Everyone turned. The doors slowly slid open. No one stood inside, at first. Then a small delivery drone rolled forward across the elevator floor, carrying a single white envelope. It stopped directly in front of Min-jae before shutting itself off. Every officer immediately drew their weapons. Min-jae bent down carefully and picked up the envelope. There was no address, only two handwritten names: Park Min-jae, Naomi Carter. Inside was a single photograph. It had been taken only minutes earlier. It showed Amara standing beside the living room window in Min-jae's apartment, looking down at the street. On the back of the photograph, written in neat black ink, were 6 chilling words. I waved. She waved back. The photograph slipped from Naomi's trembling fingers and landed face down on the polished hallway floor. Every officer standing outside the apartment stared at it in stunned silence. No one spoke. No one needed to. Richard Hale wasn't threatening them anymore. He was proving something far more dangerous. He could see them whenever he wanted. Detective Han arrived less than 20 minutes later, with 2 cybercrime specialists. The delivery drone was immediately dismantled, but the serial number had been burned away with acid. There were no fingerprints, no usable DNA. Whoever had sent it knew exactly how police investigations worked. "He planned every detail," Han muttered. Min-jae nodded. "He's not improvising." Naomi wrapped both arms around herself, as if trying to hold her composure together. "He watched my daughter." Her voice disappeared. Min-jae looked toward the apartment door, where Amara still slept peacefully, unaware that a stranger had been observing her from the street. His decision came without hesitation. "You're both leaving this building tonight." Naomi looked up. "Where would we go?" "Somewhere he can't reach." She gave him a tired smile. "That's exactly what I thought 3 years ago." Before he could answer, Dae-hyun hurried down the hallway carrying a tablet. "Sir, we found something. Show me." The screen displayed financial records from an international consulting firm that had quietly purchased several apartments around Busan over the past 2 years. None of the buyers used real names. All the companies existed only on paper. "What am I looking at?" Han asked. Dae-hyun enlarged one document. Apartment 1803, Apartment 1901, Apartment 2105, Apartment 2402. Naomi frowned. "That's my apartment." "Not anymore," Dae-hyun replied. "The shell company bought the unit 6 months before you signed the lease." The hallway fell silent. Naomi slowly turned toward Min-jae. You mean, someone made sure you rented that apartment? She shook her head in disbelief. No. Daehyun continued. The leasing agency wasn't fake. The apartment was real. Everything looked legitimate. Except the owner. Min-jae finished. Han stared at the documents. He controlled the apartment before she ever moved in. Naomi's breathing became shallow. He chose where I would live. Yes. He installed cameras before I arrived. Yes. Then, tears filled her eyes again. He never lost me. No one answered because they couldn't. She had spent 3 years believing she was escaping. In reality, every move had simply taken her exactly where Richard wanted her to be. Across the city, Richard Hale stood inside the unfinished top floor of an abandoned office tower overlooking the harbor. His assistant approached quietly. The CEO moved police into the building. Richard smiled faintly. Expected. Should we activate the next phase? Richard walked toward the enormous windows. Thousands of lights glittered beneath him. Tell me something. Yes? Why do intelligent people always assume they're chasing the hunter? The assistant remained silent. Richard continued. They're not. He turned around slowly. The hunter decides where everyone runs. He reached into his coat and removed another photograph. This one had clearly been taken years earlier. It showed a much younger Naomi standing beside another woman outside an elementary school in Atlanta. The second woman's face had been circled in red ink. Find her, Richard said. Immediately. Back at Seijin Heights, Amara finally woke and wandered into the living room, rubbing her eyes. She stopped when she saw so many unfamiliar faces. Police officers, detectives, security guards. Mommy? Naomi immediately crossed the room and hugged her tightly. We're okay. Did something happen? Naomi forced herself to smile. Just some grown-up problems. Amara looked toward Min-jae. Mr. Neighbor? Yes? Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you scared too? The room became completely still. Every adult waited for his answer. Min-jae knelt until he was eye level with her. Yes. Amara looked surprised. Really? He nodded once. Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. Then what does it mean? He smiled gently. It means you protect people even when you are. The little girl thought about that for several seconds before quietly wrapping her arms around his neck. Naomi watched the moment in silence. Something inside her shifted. For 3 years she had believed accepting help would only place other people in danger. Now someone had chosen to stand beside her anyway. Her phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. She almost ignored it before answering. Hello? No voice came through the speaker, only soft breathing. Then, after several long seconds, a calm male voice finally spoke. Good evening, Naomi. Every drop of color disappeared from her face. Richard Hale smiled on the other end of the line. I've been looking forward to hearing your voice again. Naomi couldn't breathe. Leave us alone. Richard laughed quietly. If that was all I wanted, I would have done it years ago. Min-jae stepped closer, listening carefully. Richard continued. You still don't understand why you're alive. Naomi's hand trembled violently around the phone. What do you want? Another pause. Then Richard spoke the one sentence that shattered every assumption she had carried for the past 3 years. I never spent all this time looking for you, Naomi. She froze. I was looking for your daughter. The words echoed through Naomi's mind long after Richard stopped speaking. I was looking for your daughter. Her knees nearly gave out. Min-jae caught her before she fell, taking the phone from her trembling hand. Richard Hale. Silence answered him. Then Richard laughed softly. So the famous Park Min-jae finally joins the conversation. If you have a problem, bring it to me. I intend to. Leave Naomi and Amara out of this. You still believe they're the center of this story. Richard's voice remained calm. They're only the beginning. The line went dead. Detective Han immediately took the phone. Trace it. One of the cybercrime officers connected specialized equipment within seconds. A map appeared on the laptop screen as signals bounced from one relay to another. 30 seconds later, the officer looked up. Disposable satellite relay. Han sighed. Nothing? He planned the call too. Naomi sat motionless on the sofa, unable to stop replaying Richard's final sentence. Min-jae knelt beside her. Look at me. She didn't respond. Naomi. Her eyes slowly met his. Tell me everything you've never told anyone. She shook her head. There's nothing else. That's not true. Min-jae. He wasn't looking for you. His voice was steady. That means there's something about Amara that matters to him. Tears rolled silently down Naomi's cheeks. I don't know what. Think. She closed her eyes. Memories she had buried years ago began forcing their way back. Atlanta, the foundation, Richard Hale, courtrooms, threats, fear. Then, one memory stopped her cold. Her eyes opened instantly. The hospital. Min-jae frowned. What hospital? The night Amara was born. Detective Han looked over. Naomi slowly stood. I was in labor during the middle of the investigation. Go on. Richard came to the hospital. Everyone froze. How? Han asked. Security never reported it. Naomi nodded. Because he wasn't supposed to be there. Her breathing became uneven. I woke up after the delivery and found him standing beside my bed. Min-jae's expression darkened. What did he want? He looked at Amara. Naomi's voice barely rose above a whisper. Then he smiled. Did he say anything? She nodded slowly. He said, her voice broke, one day she'll answer a question neither of us can. The room fell silent. Detective Han wrote every word down. At the time I thought he was trying to frighten me. Naomi looked toward her sleeping daughter. Now I'm not so sure. Min-jae immediately turned to Dae-hyun. Everything we have on Richard Hale. Already compiling it. No. His voice sharpened. Not the fraud case. Then what? His entire life. 20 minutes later, Hanul Holdings' private intelligence team began forwarding reports. Richard Hale had funded genetic research, medical technology startups, rare disease foundations, international fertility clinics. None of it matched the public image of a financial criminal. This doesn't make sense, Han muttered. Dae-hyun suddenly stopped scrolling. Sir, everyone looked toward him. There's one company that appears in every investigation. Which company? He enlarged an old corporate filing. Helix Biogen International. Closed 12 years ago, Dae-hyun said. Officially bankrupt. Min-jae frowned. Officially? Unofficially? He looked up. Its research disappeared. Han crossed her arms. Research into what? Dae-hyun swallowed. Human genetics. Naomi felt her heart stop. At that exact moment, Amara walked sleepily into the room carrying her stuffed rabbit. Mommy? Naomi immediately hugged her. Did I wake everybody? No, sweetheart. Amara looked around curiously. Why is everyone staring at me? Nobody answered. Min-jae couldn't. His eyes remained fixed on the intelligence report. Attached to the final page was a faded newspaper photograph taken nearly 7 years earlier. It showed Richard Hale standing beside several investors during the opening ceremony of Helix Biogen's newest laboratory. Most of the faces were unfamiliar. Except one, Min-jae slowly enlarged the image. Detective Han leaned closer. Who's that? His voice became almost inaudible. My father. Naomi looked at the screen in disbelief. Standing beside Richard Hale, smiling for the cameras, was Park Seung-ho, the late chairman of Hanwil Holdings and Min-jae's father. The room seemed to shrink around them. Every assumption they had made over the past week collapsed in an instant. Richard hadn't entered Min-jae's life because of Naomi. He had been connected to the Park family years before Naomi had ever met him. Min-jae stared at the photograph without blinking. This wasn't a coincidence. Detective Han nodded slowly. No. Dae-hyun looked at another document that had just arrived from the intelligence team. Sir, what is it? Dae-hyun's face had gone pale. Your father's name, he swallowed hard, appears on Helix Biogen's list of founding investors. Before anyone could process the revelation, every light inside the apartment suddenly went out. Complete darkness swallowed the room. Amara gasped and instinctively grabbed Naomi's hand. Emergency lights flickered on, a few seconds later, bathing the apartment in a dim red glow. Then every phone inside the room vibrated at exactly the same time. One message, one sender, unknown. Min-jae opened it first. It contained only a single sentence. Now you're finally asking the right questions. 1 year later, the rain returned to Busan, but this time it no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like peace. The city moved with its usual rhythm as ferries crossed the harbor, and commuters hurried beneath umbrellas, unaware that one of the country's largest criminal investigations had quietly come to an end months earlier. Richard Hale had finally been captured while attempting to flee through a private port outside Incheon. Years of financial crimes, witness intimidation, conspiracy, illegal surveillance, and multiple murders surfaced during the investigation that followed. His carefully constructed empire collapsed piece by piece as former associates testified against him. The mystery surrounding Helix Biogen also unraveled. The company had never discovered a miracle. Instead, it had been built on stolen medical research, illegal experimentation, and fraudulent investments hidden beneath charitable foundations. Park Sung-ho's role had been exactly what Min-jae had feared and hoped at the same time. His father had invested money during the company's earliest days without knowing what the research would eventually become. When he discovered the truth, he secretly withdrew funding and attempted to expose several executives before his sudden death years later. Richard had spent years believing the elder Park had hidden documents capable of destroying everyone connected to Helix. He believed those documents had somehow passed to Min-jae. He was wrong. The evidence had remained buried inside forgotten corporate archives until Detective Han's team uncovered them during the investigation. Justice arrived quietly, not with revenge but with truth. It was enough. Hanyul Holdings emerged stronger than before. Investors praised Min-jae for cooperating fully with authorities, even though doing so temporarily damaged the company's reputation. For him, protecting the company's name had never mattered as much as protecting its future. Policies changed. Transparency became the foundation of every decision. Employees who had once admired him from a distance slowly discovered another side of their CEO. The man who once ate lunch alone now walked through departments asking junior employees how their families were doing. His schedule remained organized, but his life no longer revolved around empty apartments and endless meetings. Some victories could never appear on financial statements. Naomi continued teaching at the international school she had grown to love. For the first time in years, she renewed a lease instead of preparing for another move. She unpacked every box she had been afraid to empty before. Family photographs finally covered the apartment walls. The emergency suitcase she had always kept hidden inside the bedroom closet disappeared forever. She no longer checked the hallway through the peephole before opening the door. Fear had quietly surrendered to ordinary life. On a warm Saturday afternoon, children filled the neighborhood park overlooking the sea. Their laughter carried across the grass as parents watched from nearby benches. Amara raced toward the playground with several friends from school, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm, even though she insisted she was now too grown up to need it. She reached the swings before turning around. "Mr. Neighbor," she shouted. Min-jae looked up from the bench where he sat beside Naomi. "You're not pushing yourself this time," she declared. "You promised." He smiled, stood, and walked toward the playground while pretending to examine the swing with the seriousness of a board meeting. "Safety inspection first." Amara giggled. "You always say that, and I'm always right." She climbed onto the swing while he gently pushed her higher. Naomi watched them together, unable to stop smiling. The distance that had once existed between them had disappeared so naturally that she could no longer remember exactly when it happened. It hadn't been built through dramatic declarations or grand gestures. It had been built through ordinary mornings, shared dinners, school concerts, hospital visits when Amara caught the flu, late-night conversations over tea, and countless moments when neither of them realized another brick had quietly been added to the life they were building together. As the sun began sinking toward the horizon, Amara ran off with her friends to buy ice cream from a nearby vendor. For the first time all afternoon, Naomi and Min-jae found themselves alone. "She's happy," Naomi said softly. He watched Amara laughing in the distance. "She deserves to be." Naomi nodded before looking out across the water. I used to think home was a place nobody could find us. Min-jae turned toward her. Now? She smiled through eyes that glistened with quiet gratitude. Now I think home is the place where you no longer have to hide. He reached for her hand. This time neither of them hesitated. The wind carried the scent of the ocean between them, as the last light of day painted the harbor gold. There's something I've wanted to ask you, he said. Naomi laughed gently. You're one of the wealthiest CEOs in the country, and somehow you sound nervous. I am. That's new. He reached into his coat pocket, but instead of removing a velvet ring box, he unfolded a small piece of construction paper that had been carefully preserved inside a protective sleeve. Naomi immediately recognized it. It was the first drawing Amara had accidentally delivered to his apartment more than a year earlier. Across the front, written in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Every hero lives next door." I've kept it ever since, he admitted. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I thought heroes were supposed to save people, he continued. Then I met the two of you. Before Naomi could answer, Amara came running back toward them, carrying 3 melting ice cream cones. She stopped several feet away, looking suspiciously between them. Why are you both crying? She asked. Naomi laughed through her tears. Because we're happy. Amara looked unconvinced. Grown-ups are weird. Min-jae chuckled. That may be true. She handed each of them an ice cream before taking both of their hands without saying a word. The three of them continued walking along the harbor as the evening lights slowly awakened across the city. No cameras watched from the shadows. No envelopes waited beneath welcome mats. No footsteps followed behind them. Only the sound of waves meeting the shore and a little girl laughter filling the spaces where fear had once lived. Sometimes the greatest miracle wasn't finding the perfect life. It was discovering that healing could begin with a single unexpected neighbor and the quiet courage to answer a child's cry through the wall. For the first time in years, Seijin Heights no longer felt like a place filled with unanswered questions. It finally felt like home. The silence that had once echoed through the luxurious hallways had been replaced by the joyful laughter of a little girl who had unknowingly healed 3 broken hearts. Every morning Park Min-jae woke before sunrise, not because of billion-dollar meetings or endless responsibilities, but because Amara would come running into the kitchen asking what they were having for breakfast. It was a sound he never knew he had been missing. Months passed, and every painful chapter of their lives slowly became a memory. The investigation was finally over. The truth had been revealed. Justice had been served, and the fear that had once followed Naomi everywhere simply disappeared. She no longer looked over her shoulder. She no longer feared tomorrow. Instead, she devoted her life to helping vulnerable families rebuild their lives through a foundation she and Park Min-jae established together. While Naomi became the heart of the foundation, Park Min-jae quietly used his influence and resources to ensure no child or parent would ever feel abandoned again. Amara flourished in every possible way. She made new friends at school, laughed more than ever before, filled countless sketchbooks with colorful drawings, and finally began dreaming about the future instead of fearing it. Every afternoon, she would run toward the school gates, knowing 2 familiar faces would always be waiting for her. One beautiful autumn evening, the 3 of them returned to the Busan Harbor promenade, where everything seemed brighter than before. The golden sunset painted the ocean, while a cool breeze drifted across the water. Amara smiled, reached into her backpack, and carefully unfolded a drawing. I made this for us, she said proudly. Park Min-jae and Naomi looked down at the picture in silence. It showed a beautiful family standing together beneath a bright blue sky. A smiling mother, a loving father, a joyful little girl holding both of their hands. Behind them stood a beautiful home overlooking the sea, with sunlight pouring through every window. Park Min-jae remembered the first drawing Amara had ever made months earlier, the lonely picture filled with sadness and unanswered questions. This one was different. There was no loneliness, no fear, only happiness. Naomi gently reached for Park Min-jae's hand as tears quietly formed in both of their eyes. Amara wrapped her small arms around them and whispered, "We're finally a family." Park Min-jae smiled through his tears before softly replying, "Yes, we finally are." As the waves gently rolled onto the shore and the lights of Busan slowly illuminated the skyline behind them, they stood together, watching the sunset without saying another word because they no longer needed to. Their greatest dream had quietly become their everyday life. Some families are connected by blood, others are brought together by kindness, courage, forgiveness, and the unexpected moments that change everything. Sometimes the family you've been searching for has been waiting just beyond the next door all along. If this story touched your heart, write "Second Chance" in the comments so others can discover this journey too. Your comment may inspire someone who needs a little hope today. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because another unforgettable Korean romance, filled with mystery, emotion, and life-changing moments, is waiting for you in our next story.